and welcome to a new episode of the Apparel Entrepreneurship Podcast. Today, we have someone incredible on, a dear industry friend, someone that is not afraid to say it as it is, to talk about all the elephants in the room when it comes to industry problems. Sam, so welcome. Tell us who you are and tell us what you do.
Thanks. It's really great to have this conversation with you in a public space. So I'm Sam Taylor. I am a third generation garment producer, which means I have grown up on the factory floor. And for my sins, I didn't leave the industry. And I have spent the last 20 years as a product developer working across high street, high end couture, and the last 10 years in sportswear. And I now run a business called The Good Factory, where we help brands make better product through both educational and tangible results for product creation.
The main topic for today is going to be circling around sustainability. But first of all, I want to what do you actually do at the Good Factory? What type of brands do you work with? What's the gist of it?
So the 80% of the work is still in product development. So that is sourcing. We do lots of advisory, ideally before the design stage. We help with the product development, and we sort of take it up to the PO stage. We do material innovation, product innovation, all that kind of really interesting and fun stuff. And then another 20%, I work with next gen material producers. We look at their strategies to increase the commercial viability of their products. There's quite a bit of marketing. And recently we've started partnering with a company called Sustainability in the UK to look at impact reporting for apparel. Yes.
An ongoing thing and not so easy to do.
No, it takes
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Well, everyone seems to have this idea that impact reporting are LCAs, and you just sort of sit around and just be like, no, just enough with the LCAs. Let's look at the tangible impact that you have. So yeah, it's that's been really interesting.
Cool. I'm thinking, since we're talking and the main topic for today is sustainability, why is ethical practices and sustainability, why is that the route for you? Why did you choose to focus on that in terms of running your business and the companies that you work with?
Do you know what? I don't know quite how it came about, but it's always been something that's been really dear to me. I think growing up in the apparel industry in the UK, my family have factories here. So I knew what manufacturing was and what decent manufacturing looked like. So when I was 17, I went skiing, and we used to ski in Eastern Europe. So it is not the same as skiing in the Alps by any stretch. And I remember, sort of going over the years, and one year I was like, I'm skiing on rock, and coming down this red run, just being like, I'm skiing on more rock than I am snow, because they didn't close runs, and there was no snow blowers, none of this. And I came over a hill, and it was just grass. I landed on grass, and it just being like, what the fuck? And instantly the next day I had a really bad ski accident because there was not enough snow cover. And it was there that I was like, there's something not right, like weather patterns are changing. And that's where I really kind of got into this idea that sustainability meant, what the impact that had on global warming. And it's kind of expanded over that point, because I was always, when I turn up at jobs, I'd always find little projects that were based around sustainability that I could work on. And it's really just kind of evolved, I think, without me really paying attention to it.
So, I mean, we're in the fashion industry, and what's the most broken part today? Why isn't it working? Why are we so impactful when it comes to the environment when it comes to the fashion industry?
I think we've forgotten what fashion is. I think we've forgotten what clothing is, what it is to clothe yourself for protection, to keep our health, creativity, self-expression. And we have replaced that with a system that is designed purely for profit. We only need to look at our production volumes, how everyone's chasing margins, not really being able to kind of zoom out at the bigger picture to even understand, what that impact has on business profit in the first place. And I think that's ultimately, the biggest problem. And it starts so small, doesn't it, that you don't kind of realize how things snowball, because I
Mhm.
don't think anyone intentionally set out to create an unethical industry that we have. But I think in chasing that profit, and then having the issues that we have with the financial system, 2008 was the year I graduated and sort of almost started my career as a paid employee as opposed to just a family member. And that had such a huge impact on how we made clothes. So I think that's the biggest problem is we're just chasing our tail to make more money, to have the lifestyle that the previous generation had. And then ultimately, I don't think we realize that that is based on first on reducing quality, because, I'm not going to lie, 15 years ago, that was a big part of my job, reducing quality to increase margins. And you can only get so far until you're making clothes that you see nipples through, right? So then you kind of move into the exploitation of workforce. And I think that's how we've sort of ended up where we have.
And another big problem that we're seeing is that, I mean, of course, since globalization happened, no longer the people that actually work with creating and with making the products, they don't actually see where it's made or how it's made. So they have no idea about it's just kind of like leadership taking decisions. They've got the cost they need to cover, they've got the margin they need to cover. But you've got designers, you've got product developers that have never been to the factories where they actually make this stuff. And I'm sure that many, if they would actually go and see how shitty those places are, they would quit their job because it just like they would never be able to stand themselves. But that's not happening, especially now after COVID. It's easier more than ever to do stuff, to create things over. You just have a couple of Zooms and all of a sudden you've got the boxes landing in your warehouse. You're done. You don't need to go to the factory. You don't need to go to the suppliers. You don't need to go meet the people that make the stuff. You're just ordering some stuff and doing it all digitally. So you have no idea on how it's all operating. And I think that as well with you know, people making decisions when they actually don't know what it actually looks like on the floor behind the scenes, so to say. And the same with the customers. You do have companies now that are really transparent and traceable, and you can see the entire supply chain. But then the majority of the companies, you have no idea. The customers have no idea how the stuff is made. And then, yeah, it's easy to order from Shein or from Temu. And yeah, it comes home and you paid 5 quid for it. Fantastic. But then it falls apart after 3 washes, or you get rashes because it's got a lot of chemicals in it. And it's like, oh, yeah. Oh. So I think that as well is a huge part of the problem because you're not going to the tailor anymore to have
Yeah.
your measurements taken, to have someone sewing it, to have someone, you're not part of the how should I say, of creating the thing. And yeah, I would love for that to come back in some. I mean, and it is right, and in some ways it is with the made to measure. And you have some companies we've interviewed several founders here that have the entire made to measure concept, and it's transparent and all that. And I find that that's really good solution also for customers to get on board and seeing what it is that they're actually buying.
Yeah, I think there's a big gap, isn't there? Because there's also what happens within brands and then what happens, how customers interact with that. Because there's one thing, you sort of notice, it's right, it is visiting, but it's also who has a reference to what a good factory is. So, when I was 12, I would work in my uncle's factory and he made for like Esprit, Ralph Lauren, Diane von Furstenberg. And I worked in that factory, in the packing lines, and the whole family would be there for like the big orders. And he ran a fabulous factory. And that's partly why I loved manufacturing. And my aunt, she worked at another factory that I used to Skype school because I get to go and hang out there. And it's interesting because then, so I was 12, but by the age of 16, I was spending my summer holidays in China at factories. And let me tell you, those two places are very different. And the one thing I would say is also having manufactured here in the UK is there's nothing the same as to what my uncle's factory and my aunt's factory were like. And in fact, I would say it's even gotten worse here in the UK. So if you don't have a reference for what is good, you kind of go to these factories in the Far East and kind of go, oh, well, it's okay because it's like all the others that I've seen. And you're like, but that's not what the factories, 20, 30 years ago looked like. It's not the same.
No, that's such a good point. And again, we hear all the time, I mean, made in China or made in Italy or made in Europe. Yeah, but just because it's made in somewhere, it doesn't necessarily mean good or bad, because there's really crappy factories in Europe as well. I've been to some, and there's some phenomenal, ultra technical, high-end factories in China that I've never seen anything like it in Europe, because they are so developed and so much, like before using the technology and the latest machinery than all the factories that I've been at in Europe. So this is yet another misconception, I think, both in the companies not really thinking about this when they're making decisions. To your point, what is the reference? Let's look at that, the actual factory itself, and if it's ethical, if the paid and the machinery and all the solution, the technicity, but then not where it's actually situated, more kind of like where is it, what does it look like? So I find that that's a really, really good point. I want to talk to you a little bit about the biggest challenges that you're seeing companies have in terms of sustainability right now, no matter if they're small or big or startups. What is that?
So there's two, actually. One is traceability. We have we've gate kept our knowledge and suppliers for so long. The one thing I've always done with the Good Factory is I identify the resin that we're going to use first, and then I go and ask the resin supplier, who are your customers? And then you get the yarn suppliers, and you go to the yarn suppliers and you're like, who are your customers? And then you have to build it that way, because going backwards, no one will give you a damn thing. Which is, I think we're particularly in Europe, that's going to have to change, because if we want traceability and they want that as part of ESPR, that's going to have to, they're going to have to change. But I think there's going to be a lot around business protection, I think, when coming into things like that. And then the other thing is, ultimately, all brands want to make something sustainable, but they want to do it within the business structures that we have. So they want it to perform the same way as conventional fabrics. They want the lead times to be the same. They want the prices to be the same. They want,
Lower.
they want everything set up to be the same so they can drop it in. And you're like, there's very few solutions that can be drop-in. And then you move to things like, and that's when it comes into greenwashing, right? The drop-in solutions for recycled polyester is PET from bottles, or the latest one is carbon capture polyesters. And you just sort of sit there and think, how is that benefiting? It's a low bar. We're just not making the changes we need to and fast enough, because nobody is ready to deal with the fact that we have to change how we're looking at things and how we develop, how we produce, everything in order to make it sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, you say that traceability is one of the challenges. So when we get the traceability, and especially here in Europe, when we get the new legislation in place, we're going to get a behind the scenes look. But can we say anything about what brands and also consumers should look for? I mean, there's so many aspects. You have the composition of materials, you have the chemicals, you have the dyeing, you have the location, you have the transportation, you have the ethical aspects. what should we look at first? Is there anything that has the biggest impact, or is a compound effect of everything?
Do you know what? That's a really hard question. And this is the thing, is it depends what is valuable to you. So personally, I have a little bit of obsession with water. Um, and so through that, I buy more silk necessarily than cotton because of the recycling process that water, or how the water is used, is different. Um, there are, but there are other things, if you care about carbon, for example, then having something that's printed rather than dyed is a huge impact. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think anyone's got a grip on
Yeah,
it.
and that's the difficult part, I think, about sustainability, and it also comes into durability. A piece of clothing that falls apart after 6 months, you can't compare it to something that lasts for 15 years. And
Yeah,
and then you have the composition, you have the recycled materials, you have the organic materials, but it's so hard for consumers and brands also to see what to focus on.
I want to come back to what you said about traceability eh, and transparency. The hard bit is that everybody's talking about it and wants it, and everybody's now talking about we have to collaborate, but very few actually do. Again, back to the gatekeeping. And I have not come to a solution yet, or I don't really understand the fear. Of course, there's a fear of competition, there's a fear, but at the same time, nobody can tackle this alone, and it's impossible to get all the information to do it, so to say, right alone. So what's your take on that? Because again, like, you go to all the events and everyone's talking about, hey, we need to collaborate, we need to do, and then you're like, okay, let's go. How? And then everyone's like, yeah, well, I'll come back to you on that one. And nobody has a question or an answer. It's like,
yeah,
what the hell?
yeah, yeah. It's so funny. I went to the Future Fabrics Expo
Uh,
at London last year, and H&M were up there talking about it, and I was sitting there just being like, I know from your suppliers, like the problems that they're facing with you, and you are sitting there and lying outright. Either you don't know and therefore you're bad at your job, or
yeah.
you're lying outright. Neither of those things are good. And I honestly don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think this is where, though, it comes down to having good relationships.
Mm,
And this is something I think I've been really fortunate with in the industry, is that I have really good relationships. And so therefore, it's like you say, the suppliers tell me who their customers are. And they tell me who their suppliers are. But how, I haven't quite worked out how I use that information in a good way. Because it is still, that level of confidential information. And the reason people tell me is because I treat what they tell me as confidential. So I don't know the answer to that in which sense. I do think there may be become a point, and this is kind of where I think blockchain has its purpose, is you can block off that information. And so perhaps maybe it's only available to regulators. And, I know that sounds like a big thing, but regulators now use so much AI that they can sense check that information. So I do wonder whether that will end up being a better use case, because there's no reason that we can't reduce the energy output by that, by just looking at PO numbers and encapsulating those into each stage. But yeah, honestly, I wish I had the answer to that. I don't know.
yeah. And it's also, one of the reasons why we launched Sustain 20, the website for circular solutions in the fashion industry, because we discussed with so many instances and everyone was like, yeah, we don't want to share. It's our intellectual property. We don't want to share the list. And we're like, well, but you're here on one sentence, you're sitting saying we want to collaborate. Everyone needs to collaborate to move forward and to make our industry better. But then you don't want to share. So it's like, so yeah, we created it in 2 weeks and then it was up, and now it's all free to use, up to free to upload, whatever. So it's just frustrating, but we need to kind of partner up. And relationships, of course, are key.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, like, how many, like, do you have visibility on how many people have downloaded your list from that?
It's not, it's more that you go in and search on the site. So it's not a
Yeah.
list that you can download, but we have, I think, 250 companies on there, and the traffic is quite good. So and also we hear, because I've gotten, DMs from LinkedIn, like, oh, thank you so much. This is a fantastic source. So for
Mm.
us, it's like, the more people that use it, the better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's a wonderful tool, particularly because, yeah, like your experience of having those great companies. And it's really interesting though, isn't it? Because it's something I get asked a lot as well. Like, can you recommend places? And my list is a lot smaller than yours, because of, yeah, like the people that I've worked with and the relationships that I've cultivated over that time. Which also I think works quite well, because if I say to somebody, well, if you say that I sent you, I almost think they do a better job, because they don't want to, they're not bothered about upsetting that individual person, but upsetting
Yeah.
somebody who turns up with a decent amount of volume. That's, I'm the person they don't want to be upsetting. So there is a lot of that. But then at the same time, it's how because I still have bills to pay. So how am I being reimbursed for ensuring that my time goes into those
Yeah.
relationships, so that you can then leverage what I have built over the last 20 years?
It's easy. I mean, you do a kickback setup, and that's how we do it with certain things as well. Yeah, recommendation fee.
Mm. See,
So
yeah,
yeah.
but I know people that use that, and I'm just like, having then had conversations with their clients, and you're like, yeah, that feels like a scam.
All right.
I've not quite worked out.
Let's talk about the brands who want to create the responsible products, and what can they start thinking about before they start designing the products. What can they think about before, if they want to create sustainable brand and just sustainable products? What's the first things they should start considering?
Well, I mean, I think you pointed it out, only a few moments ago. They've got to have a point of view, because they can't solve everything. You can't have fair wages. You can't have non-toxic products. You can't save water. You can't have reduced carbon emissions. Like, you can't do all those things unless you plan on having a really high price point. So there has to be a roadmap for that. So what is your standpoint? What is your 2050 goal? What are you measuring it against, and all that? And that's what you have to have first, I think, ultimately, because otherwise you've got no idea even what fabrics that you want to use in that scenario. And you can't give your design team direction, because we all know, just taking knitwear as a prime example, merino wool is fabulous, and it will generally last a little bit longer, because it's, if there are ways you can make it last longer compared to a lamb's wool product. But at the same time, you don't want to use a fine gauge knit with lamb's wool, because it's just like, it's not going to work. So you have to have that standpoint and work out what that is first, I think. And if you don't have that, then anything you do is not going to work towards your brand awareness or any of your sustainability goals.
I think you're so right. You need to be honest and transparent about what you're focusing on, because honestly, as soon as you produce something, you can't be 100% sustainable. Then you're already producing something. So it's really about, we are focusing on this today. And as you said, this is our roadmap. This is what we want to improve and work on. So someone that just goes out and says that, we are the sustainable brand, you're not. We are working on this, and these are our ambitions.
Yeah, and this is really key as well, because obviously, so in the UK we've got the Green Claims Code, which came into force in 2021, and obviously in the EU you're going to be getting the Green Claims Directive. Now, I didn't realize until recently that the UK are actually heavily involved in guiding the EU on that legislation, and it's largely going to be the same, with the exception of that the EU is going to be a lot more prescriptive in how you write things, which I don't think in the UK they agree with. But they are very much a case of, if you cannot explain in detail, firstly, how you've drawn your decisions, what feedback you've got from your customers, then you are going to be in trouble around how you communicate this. And she says, and then it also has to apply to future goals. And the thing to note about this legislation is that it doesn't mean that a customer buys from you. It means that they do something because of what you've said. So it can be as much as they've gone and researched it. And so if they do that and what they found is false, you are liable, to be accused of greenwashing.
And the entire transparency, of course, is going to help people make better choices, but also I think in the end is going to force companies to have better operations. And in terms of greenwashing, it's confusing as hell also for the people in the companies, because this is what we're seeing at our agency. It's confused. Like, not even the people working in the companies actually know. Say someone from design, they create the product together with product development, the product is great. Then marketing goes and does something and say something about it, where half of it is not really true. I'm saying, like, it's not really, they're like tweaking it just to get more sales. And then you're having the conversation with design and they're like, yeah, but they kind of missed half the points with what the product was intended to do. They just kind of like wrote these points now just to kind of sound better so they can make more sales. And it's so even in the companies themselves, there's loads and loads of frustration in terms of what it actually is and how to communicate and what to communicate and when, and is actually the product that was intended, is this the actual product that gets pitched to the end consumer? A lot of the time it is not, because I mean a lot of um the teams work in silos as well in bigger companies, and their communication is not that great. It's just like they do stuff and they leave it to the next team and then they leave it to the next team, so they're not working holistically as one. It's more like blocked, and then the product is out and then they're on to the next one. So it's it's freaking frustrating.
You know what? That's exactly what our Competitions and Marketing Authority, who wrote the Green Claims Code, have said is the biggest problem that they are finding. The biggest problem is the mismatch between sustainability and marketing. And they said in a lot of cases, it can even be down to the fact that sustainability teams use a language marketing don't know what it is. And they're afraid to even ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And marketing doesn't even know what the product is actually supposed to do or what the true intention is. So everyone's talking their own language. It's fantastic. I want to go back to polyester because we see a lot of times, especially with startups, I want to build a sustainable company, sustainable brand. We're going to use recycled polyester. And then we've done it. What is going on? Tell us.
Do you know what? And I think this is a prime example of B2B greenwashing. Because again, like, sorry to bang on about the Green Claims Code, but it's not as strict for business to business as it is for direct to consumer. Because it's so, like, I know exactly what you mean. Like, I see it all the time and they turn up and they're like, oh, look, it's Oak-Tex Standard 100, no harmful chemicals. And you're like, no, that's not what that means in any way, shape or form. And yeah, I don't know. I think it is this level of potentially, I don't know whether we're now in a startup phase where lots of people, go and start brands and they're like, oh, well, it's fine. I'll just go to fabric shows and then believe what the salesperson tells them instead of perhaps putting money into that level of development. I think there is this idea that clothing is easy. And I don't, and it's just not. I mean, we both know clothing is not easy.
No, because there's so many moving parts and there's so many. And nowadays, it's not just like from design perspective, is also just because you make it, you think the customers are going to show up. Now, the biggest problem, when you've made it, you've come 50%. You have the other 50 to actually put it to the world and have people buy it. Otherwise, you've just overproduced and congratulations, you've just made more waste. So it's this balance in making sure that you're doing something that the customers want and need instead of piling up the landfills and the incineration queues. So it's, and I think also it's become, it's never been this easy to start a clothing company like it is today. You can do it again from your laptop. You don't even need to touch the fabric. You don't need to see. You can just do, print on demand or whatever, or just order, 5 pieces from a private label factory from China, and all of a sudden you've started a clothing brand. So it's, again, like it's easy, but it's also the hardest ever to launch because there's so many things that you need to know in order to do it right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in the beginning we talked about the industry and the impact, and you said about brand chasing profitability today and just the margins. So how can a brand find the right balance between the price, the style they're making, and also keeping it sustainable?
I mean, that one's a big question. You touch on areas that are not my
Yeah, but
specialty.
these are the
But it
interesting
is
things.
like, yeah, I never deal with anything that's kind of customer based because
Yeah.
I really hate the general public. But I think I think it comes down to, again, like you have to hire people who are able to understand what the industry is. And so that means that you are hiring somebody who, can take a design and know how to make it within that price point. And so many people miss that skill, I think, nowadays. And everything starts from a price point. In fact, I think in the last year, I've had 6 brands approach me and we've had the same conversation. They've turned up with a great price for their t-shirts, everything they want to do within it. You're like, yeah, that's feasible. But then they want to buy a 2-in-1 pair of shorts for 50 cents more. And you're like, entirely unrealistic, guys. And I've had that. Yeah, that's been a big conversation.
And it's funny how you see this happening in terms of the companies that, they're looking at the materials, they're looking at the prices, they wanna get the people on board, but then they're like, even though they get the knowledgeable people on board, they still don't want to make the decision because they've already made up their mind. This has happened to us so many times, and it's frustrating because you know that it's eventually that product is going to fail. So just to say that, yeah, but now we're going to continue, but it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to, again, it's like a waste of design department's time. It's waste of the product manufacturer, whomever's involved. So it's again, it's like freaking frustrating because it's not gonna do anything.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting, isn't it? Because that then falls back into how good are the directors of that business that they cannot direct their teams into that direction.
Yeah. And also one other thing we're seeing in terms of the price and the style and the commerciality is when a lot of companies don't know how to price engineer, and like they know they come with a price, and that's the thing, and then they have the fancy mood board with competitive products, and you're like, yes, but these competitive products actually are a completely different price point. They have completely different materials. So okay, let's take those away. Let's look at so this is how we do it with our clients that come and we're like, this is how you do price engineering. And so you take the product and you look at what the material, you literally reverse engineer from the price. How much value and quality can you put into that product at that price? And no, this means that obviously you're not going to be able to afford that Gore-Tex fabric that costs you 29 euros per meter because your price is too low. you won't be able to make it, have the 10 different pockets because your price is too low. So it's just trying to look at it. And it doesn't necessarily, just because you're price engineering a product, it doesn't necessarily mean that the product is going to be a bad product. A price engineered product can still be really good and give a lot of value. It's that you need to be realistic with what you fill that value with.
Yes. Yeah, it's exactly that. I had a client come to me once, and again, great prices. But they had a scenario where they'd gone to a designer first. So they'd given the designer this really great brief and this great amount of money, and the designer used up all that money. Like, I mean, the different fabrics and the panels and the seaming and the printing. And I was like, no, you can't get anything better than recycled polyester in this instance because you can't afford anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also one of the things that we see quite a lot. Again, is that a lot of companies don't use briefs before they even start designing the product. We do this with our clients, and now it's actually built inside a Porsche. So you have to create a brief, basically stating who the customer is, what the FOB should be, what type of materials, colors, features, etc., what the purpose of the product is before you even start designing it. Because then you will know that, will this meet the customer demand? Will this meet our margins? Can we actually, do we even have the manufacturer to create this product? So it answers so many questions and kind of eliminates a lot of errors before you even put pen to paper to actually design the thing. And yeah, so design briefs are helping a lot and just eliminating stupidity along the line.
Yes. Yeah, we used to do that at Wiggle. Every product had a brief before we did anything with it. And actually, yeah, now I've started insisting that I get the same from my clients. And they need to have me involved before the design process, because otherwise, yeah, you get designs and you're like, I don't have the skill set to reverse engineer this because I'm not a designer. So yeah, it's a lot of that in that instance.
I'm thinking about I mean, you're talking about inside brands that they don't really communicate. They tend to work in silos. The marketing department work for themselves. You have the product development, but also, how does it go today in the supply chain? How can you make sure that you actually get the right information you need from all your suppliers and manufacturers? I know that a lot of brands are struggling with that, and I think it might also be harder now when you get the new legislation with all the information you need to get. Can you say anything about that? How brands can think to get this kind of information and have these relationships with their suppliers?
So I think it's probably using platforms like Porsche, I reckon, will probably help.
Yeah,
I'm
of
a big
course.
fan of your platform to kind of building that in. Because I mean, there's no reason that eventually all this is going to be able to adapt into creating siloed information based on a who needs to know basis, which ultimately, a consumer doesn't care where you're getting your resins from. They don't care. And ultimately, only your competitors really care. What we need to know is, what is that recycled content and can you prove it? So I do wonder again, I think this is where certification bodies are going to end up. We all know GRS, which is a really great example. If it's used well, it's a really great example of where traceability lies within that. But so few people, I think, kind of understand how to use it. It's like you turn up and a fabric man will go, oh yeah, it's a GRS for the polyester yarn. And I'm like, what do you mean it's just for the yarn? I know based on their what the composition is, then exactly how much recycled content is in there. And then you sort of sit there and just be like, you can only get to 40% in your resins? Come on, guys. Do you think 40% versus, 60% virgin is that impact? Whereas in the end, the brand will turn around and just be like, oh, it's recycled. And you're like, technically it's not, is it? Because even on a mass balanced approach, that's not. So I think, this is where certifications will probably, I think, come in, and lots of certification numbers,
Do you think
which
that's
doesn't
the
love
way to
that many
go?
numbers.
Do you think certifications are the way to go to make sure the data is accurate? Because that's also a discussion that comes into when you have the transparency or you receive all the information. How will brands and consumers actually know that this is the right data? What's your thought on that?
I mean, I think this is where we start tracking everything by weight. And, we know we do this with cotton already. A certain percentage of cotton goes into the gin by weight, then it comes out. And I think that's where it's going to start being traced in that sense. But ultimately, no, we don't. We will never have full visibility. I say this based on, we do a lot of waste in the UK, and I'm going to be quite controversial in this one, but there's a lot of waste in the UK that is effectively a mafia scenario. There are rule breaking, they don't care about that impact. There was an example only a few months ago where so it's the UK's smallest city, it's called Lichfield, and basically a road into Lichfield was blocked by trash. And we know that that's an illegal trash company who've been paid for by somebody else, and they've just dumped it in the middle of the road. And we have so many illegal dump sites in the UK. Don't even get me started on the second-hand market and all the rest. And that's the problem is, there's always going to be people who will break the law. There are always going to be people that do that. I don't really know what to say in that instance. I think that's where fines have to be really big. And people who run companies need to be held liable for any illegal activities that happen within their companies, which I don't think currently anybody does, unless somebody dies. Nobody is being held accountable in that same way. So there isn't the incentive to do that, because we all know the scenario of the plastic bottles being made in the factory and then they go to the chipper next door. And then until there is a decent step from legislation, I'm not sure that will ever change.
And of course, we hope it's going to make massive changes, because right now what we're seeing, especially when it comes to smaller companies and especially startups, they're like, we want to start with 20-piece collection, and you're like, but then they want to use agents, and then they have no idea who makes their stuff. They have no idea where the things come from, and you're like, maybe it's better if you start with a 3-piece collection where you go deep rather than wide and literally see where everything comes from, have full traceability, full transparency, know every single detail, and really focus your time and efforts there, and then scale that instead of going 20-piece collection. You have no idea, some agent's gonna make it, you put it on the website, then it's great. So I think, and in terms of bigger companies, I would also rather see reduction in the number of products, and them spending their focus on going deeper and improving their supply chains and their relationships and that bit, than trying to grow the collections crazy amounts, and that 30% they're not selling. A lot is going to end up in waste. People are not going to care. They're not going to buy it. It's just stupid. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, you mentioned in the beginning, impact reports. Could you tell us more what that is? And is that something that brands should use, can use? Can you tell us more about what that means?
Yeah. So an impact report is basically what impact do they have? And it can cover everything. So the British Fashion Council last year, or maybe the year before, asked for an impact report based on, how they are impacting through their grants the fashion system. And they were looking at, is there an increase in made-to-measure brands? Did these brands see an increase in export? So it's basically anything that has an impact on either your customers, it can be on your competitors, it can be on marketing, it can be on the environment. All these sorts of things is basically an impact report. And it can mean anything, but it's a good way to communicate to people that you have reviewed, what you're looking at. So it could be a case of, you've switched all your fabric to recycled and you want to look at, has that, and perhaps you do it locally, for example, say, we'll use Kevin from what's it there? Sportswear of Tomorrow as an example, because obviously he's got his Thai facility.
He was on this podcast many podcasts ago. Yeah, one of our most listened podcasts. So he's fantastic.
He is, and he can commission an impact report that looks at the waste within the area that they're collecting it. Are they having an impact by doing that? And that has that then filtered through into an uptake of local companies using that fabric. So that's what an impact report is. It's a word that means lots of things.
So is there something similar for brands on that level that can show what impact their collections have, their products? What can they do to show this? Will they do an LCA or something like that to produce or show the information, the carbon dioxide emissions, the water usage? Would that be a good way if more brands disclose that?
I don't think so at the moment, because we don't have enough information. The polyester LCA we're using is from 1992. Like, I was 6. If you turn around and just be like, let's look at the world through that lens, that doesn't work in today's climate. So, and also then you've got regional data. You've got this cotton one. Oh, it's really water intensive. But we know that or those of us in sourcing, for example, know that the region that has least water intensity is West Africa. So you can't compare like cotton from southern China or India to West Africa and under one LCA. I think that's largely BS, and then they're expensive. All the inputs and all the outputs. There's so many variables that I just don't think. For me personally, like I understand why, because we need some form of measurement, but this is where I think brands just need to invest in experienced people like we are to turn up and we can go, you know what? We know from our experience that reactive dyes are better for this product. We're looking at it not just from a measurement perspective, but longevity, because you want, that UV rating. You don't want it washing. We all have issues with polyamide and navy, whereas we know it's better on polyester, and all these things that we've kind of built, our knowledge bases that are built that you don't get through an LCA. And in large scenarios, I read LCAs that companies have done, and you're like, it's missing a giant bit, and dyeing and the colors is normally the giant bit it's missing. And you're like, that actually has a huge impact, because it's a chemical, and you're going back to like the chemicals and everything else. So it's not something. This is where I sit around and think I would rather companies have impact over like just going through an LCA, because this is where you can sit around and then you can go into colors, and you're just like, oh, actually, we know we don't do blacks on cottons because it requires more dye baths, so we use lighter colors. And you don't need to have an LCA you don't need to spend all this money. Like, you just need somebody who understands how dye baths in cotton work.
Yeah, and also it takes a lot of time and resources to do a life cycle assessment. And even if you try, I spoke to this company that only works with brands that try to do the LCA, and I asked them, so how many of your brands to actually succeed in getting 100% of the data? And probably around 3%. So 97% of the brands that want to do this still don't manage to get all the information. And when they do it, after months of work, it's just a timestamp. So everything could have changed during that time and can change afterwards. So it's a frustrating thing. So I agree with you that everyone should look into ways of doing this in a better way.
Mm.
And that's why I want to move the conversation into circularity. We've talked about sustainability, but now, of course, with what's happening in the world, with the waste, with everything that we literally just discussed, uh, we're seeing brands shifting in the industry, the need for shift towards circularity, and not just talk about recycled polyester anymore. So touch on that. Why is circularity important right now? And yeah.
Well, it's so circularity. I mean, I still see brands, I will say, that think recycling is circularity, particularly in sportswear. They are massive on that one. And that would have saved us in the 90s if we started at scale in the 90s, but we didn't. Um, so I think, yeah, circularity is important because it makes us, or in my opinion, it should make us reassess our relationships with everything and everyone. It's not just economic value, but it's the natural value. We know water is a diminishing resource. And how do we put back into that, and what do we do with it? There is our relationships with soil. There is relationships with craftspeople. So circularity, I think, is much more a relationship based system than like the likes of recycling, which is still just a singular transaction.
Can you give an example of any brands that you know that are really good at circularity that we could have as an inspiration?
It's hard because I work in sportswear, and no, because we work with so many synthetics. That's a really difficult one to say, but there's no one that I can sit here and think about off the top of my head that goes, actually, yes, circularity, that's amazing, because there's always a step. And the problem we have, and I'm going to come back to dyeing on this one, is that 97, 98% of all the dye stuffs we use are synthetic. And they are going to have a much bigger impact because we're literally coating a fiber in something. It's a super washable, for example. So I'm a massive fan of merino. But if you put a superwash on it, you're coating that in plastic. That's effectively what you're doing, and then that impacts the circularity within that. So there isn't, because I don't think we have fully grasped the system yet, and how we change it, because we're still on we need to produce these volumes. And so the brands are driving that conversation around the production volumes instead of looking at, well, how much of the good stuff do we have? How much of it is ours? And so I think, yeah, until we kind of move into that conversation around, okay, how much indigo dye do we have? How much can we produce? Natural indigo. Can we then turn around and decide how many jeans the world can produce? So yeah, it's a real hard one. Again, because it's not just about end of life. It's durability, it's remake, and it's all these things. And I think we've put in a lot of marketing things that kind of make just kind of little things that sound really great. I had an example the other week on LinkedIn, which was somebody was like, oh, it's great because you've got a label and you can put like the person's name who owned it before you. And I was like, you can tell a man came up with that, because no woman in their right mind is going to be like, yes, in the age of social media, I want my name on some jeans that I don't know where it's going to end up. And I think that's like the worst idea ever. And then kind of people bring it in, but it's circular. You're like, no, it isn't.
And I think circularity, of course, is the idea and the concept is fantastic, but we're still thinking linear. I mean, brands, especially brands that we discuss with, they're still thinking, how do we increase the number in our styles in our collection? They're not thinking potentially reducing that, but how do you then grow your revenue with secondary business models that are available right now. I mean, in France, just recently, the other day, I saw that the biggest um, platform where people buy clothes in France is Vinted, and it's not H&M or Zara or whatever. I think Vinted was first, Amazon was second, and then came the rest. And I mean, the number one platform where people buy clothes, which is a secondhand store. So that's how you need to be thinking right now, not just how many more pieces can we add in our collection in the hopes that we're going to grow a business. It's more like, what can we do with the amount that we have, or potentially reduce the amount, but then get in the revenue in other ways, with the rental, with this, the resale, with subscription, with. But then what we're also hearing is that a lot don't actually dare to do these solutions full on, because they're like, well, at the moment we don't know if they're going to bring us extra revenue. So it's this catch 22, like, yeah. So but then they don't want to fully invest, and then they don't want to educate the customer, and then they blame the customer for not knowing and for not wanting to. So it's this, like, again, frustration.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we see that, yeah, all the time. But and this is why I talk about planned degrowth so much, and have done for years, is because we cannot keep going on this economical journey that we are on. The UK government, our new UK government, that we've only had less than a year, are so obsessed with growing the GDP. And I'm not even sure they know why. Like, why are they doing that? And ultimately, these brands are going to come very quickly into a brick wall. It's not a slow break situation. It's going to be a brick wall. And they are either going to be prepared for that, or they are going to die. And yeah, like, I think this is the thing. I think we're looking at this new system, like a new way of working, and a new way of financial reporting as well, that kind of really hides how businesses are doing. I say that because in the UK, we have got Boohoo, who are, trying to refinance a massive loan that is more than twice, perhaps even 3 times the value of the guy that owns it. And you have that moment of, how has this debt got so out of control? And then we also have ASOS, who are a darling of the British fashion era, and was almost like that start into fast fashion. I know Zara sort of did it first, but I think them in that online space did it really well. And now we're just looking at this scenario where I don't know how they're still going.
Yeah.
And I think there's just lots of things just being hidden within that, and everyone is just like hanging on for that little bit longer. But I think, yeah, if you've got the cash in the bank, there needs to be radical reinvestment into new areas, because otherwise, yeah, you're going to hit the same fate as everybody else.
We touched a bit earlier about on certifications. Are there any great certifications out there? Are they helpful? First of all, are they helpful at all? And are there any in particular that are really helpful when it comes to sustainability and circularity?
They are good if you know what they mean and how to use them effectively. So in terms of like the water and the chemicals, Oaketex 100, I'm a big fan of. ZHDC, I mean, what is even the point of them? There are other ones. I was never a fan of B Corp, but actually I spoke to a woman called Claudia Abram, who is their marketing director of, I think they're definitely the UK's highest scoring B Corp, but I think they might be the world's highest scoring fashion B Corp, called Deploy in the UK. And she was like, actually, it's really amazing, because it really makes us work on ourselves, because we care about our score. And so it really makes us review and everything else. And from my conversation with her, like, now I think B Corp is a lot better. It's interesting. I know a brand that was initially thinking of Blue B Corp, but then decided to connect to Blue Sign instead. And I was like, they're not the same.
No.
Like, at all. Congratulations. Yeah, you signed up to Blue Sign because your factories already have the certifications and you feel like handing over some money without doing the work. So yeah, I think there are really great examples. You know, I still think organic and regenerative standards are really good. And there are various ones. I mean, obviously you always need to kind of check. You can't just rely on third-party certifications and third-party verifications, particularly not if that certifying body are using then auditing companies. You know, I think we have to be really wary of
But it can
those.
also be tough for, especially for startups that have a limited budget. And some of these certifications, they require that you pay for them and also put in resources. So we know we have clients that want to have these certifications, but they can't start out with them because they don't have the finances. So I think that's kind of counterproductive because the reason is because to help the industry become better. And then you have this obstacle from the brands that want to use them that can't start using them. So what's your thoughts on this? Are there certifications that are completely free, that are easy to get into?
So
Or
yeah, there are ones that you can use. So for example, like through Okotex 100, you can use that as a brand, providing your factory has it. And the tests aren't that expensive, really, like in the grand scheme of things. So you can use that. And then obviously there's REACH. If you can ensure REACH compliance, you can use REACH for free. Not that anyone knows what REACH is. But even so, I learned the other day actually from a factory in Turkey that smaller brands could use their GOTS certification within their marketing. And I didn't realize that, but they were like, yeah, they can use our certification. So we certify all our cotton because it's fully traceable. And yeah, we allow the brands to use it. So there's no cost in that instance. So yeah, there are some. And I think, yeah.
and there's also now coming new legislation here in the EU, especially. Maybe you can talk about similar things coming up in the UK, but how can, in just in like a quick version, what's upcoming and how can brands prepare? What's happening in these next few years?
So the big thing and the one thing that we know, I think that we know a lot more about is the DPP, because we know the textile laws are changing. So that is a big one, and there's loads of information online people can find to start implementing that, because that is ultimately the first step to feeding into the eco design for sustainable product regulation. And there is going to be things around durability, product environmental footprint and things like that. But if you've started with the DPP, you'll be able to much easier sort of feed into those. And then obviously you've got the Green Claims Directive, which will, I'm not sure what the timeline is for that, but certainly by looking at the UK regulation that we have in there, you'll be well on your way to kind of understanding that. And you have the forced labour ban, which came in last year, which is really important because a lot of fashion businesses, when you turn up and you find forced labour or there is outsourcing that you don't like, generally brands either don't pay the PO or just exit the business. And the regulation very clearly states you cannot do that anymore. And that is for everybody. And then we have the EU deforestation regulation, which will be from the end of this year, unless they delay it again. There will be that regulation, which you need to be sort of really aware of if you're using leathers or rubber for wetsuits. You know, that all falls into those categories. And then there is the new reporting directives, the CSDDD, which I'm a big fan of, but obviously we have seen the new German chancellor is now pushing for that to be canned. So I should imagine that will be canned.
There's a lot of things happening. I just want to mention that we have had an entire episode about digital product passports that you can listen to or watch here on YouTube as well if you want to dive into that. And you should also, of course, check out Porsche.cloud, our solution for handling digital product passports, if that could be something for you.
In terms of what you just said, the legislation, I think, for brands to change the way they operate, which obviously is no longer very good. We need the law, because otherwise we're just going to continue operating as usual as long as we're making money, right? So I think there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress right now from brands, which is what we're seeing, as there's quite a lot of unknown still, because they haven't made up their minds yet on certain aspects in terms of what's going to fully be inside the BPs, and also even the date is not already set yet. But I think all this is really good. I hope it's going to have massive impact, in a positive impact, of course, in terms of how we treat suppliers, manufacturers, the end consumer, just like how brands operate in general. But I think what is going to be the best part is that all of a sudden now the customers can make better choices, because they can see who's doing what, where the stuff comes from. So I love that aspect. And I think in terms of brands, for them is not just going to be, yeah, we're compliant, here's all the information. For them is an opportunity into building better relationships with their customers, with their suppliers, and all the partners. So I'm very, very positive for this, because I want to see the silver lining in all the regulations, and not, stress and have anxiety, but more like, what is actually the opportunity in how brands can operate better, increase their business, whatever, but also make sure that they're creating and doing, putting out products almost holistically together with their customers, because their customers will be more involved into their operations just per default, because they will scan the stuff, they will be able to go read it, they will be able to communicate with the companies, get feedback. That's how they can do in Porsche. They can literally give you feedback. So no, right now.
Okay, unfortunately, we have some technical issues with this podcast interview. We lost the connection with Sam, but we still have the best questions to ask her. So from this point on, she's both gonna ask the questions herself and answer them. So Sam, take it away.
3 things brands should do to be more responsible. They need to visit their suppliers. They need to ensure that they've got good data for that as well. So in terms of sourcing manuals, that also needs to include on the list machine lists from your suppliers, so you know that they can actually make what you are asking them to. It's ensuring that audits are happening. And it's really having a robust look at your supply chain. It is also having open costings, or understanding what your costings are made out of, what the fabrics are, what the trims are. And then you can work out from that, using sewing minutes, as to whether it's feasible that your supplier could be paying living wages, or just ensuring that minimum wages it's being paid. And there are great tools online that can help with that, particularly from the International Labour Organization, and they've got loads of free resources to help brands understand that it's an ethical supply chain. And then the other thing I would say is having a roadmap. It's understanding what they want to say, so that you can make good decisions, because you can't make good decisions if we're trying to do everything. Myth about sustainable fashion that I would like to bust is that it costs more. It doesn't. I mean, it does if you basically just want to create the same product, but make your fabric, from preferred materials. That will make it cost more. But you can be really clever with what you do and the tools that you have, and the methods of production. All these things you can really build that in. There's never been such a wide choice of materials, construction techniques, dye techniques, printing techniques, all these things that you can encompass to create a product that is effectively what you want it to do, to communicate what you want it to communicate, but that is still within that price point. So yeah, there's the idea that it's going to be more expensive. It's not true necessarily. Obviously, that doesn't apply if you're exploiting your supply chain. Then obviously to just stop exploiting your supply chain, it is going to cost more. The most overhyped sustainability trend is without a doubt recycled polyester from bottles. You still see it even now right across the industry. This recycled polyester material that it can be recyclable, and you're like, it can't, not really, not without a structured plan. I think the one that's most overlooked is, and it still requires some development, but it's the fact that natural fibers are naturally compostable. So obviously if you kind of look into that, looking at the dye stuffs, looking at your finishes, it's much easier to create a compostable product than you think, but you do have to understand that chemistry at the other end. Bold prediction, responsible fashion. I think this might be a little bit of a depressing point of view, but I think we are on the verge of an economic restructure. Don't want to say collapse, because I think that scares people, but we are definitely on the verge of an economic restructure. Like the situations of infinite growth are not going to be possible. And because of that, I think, it's like we were talking about earlier, about businesses having to have other revenue streams and needing to build them in. So I do think there's going to be lots of businesses that are very well known now that won't be around in 10 years because they haven't adapted to a new economic reality. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that the majority of people are going to have less money. And there is a bottom in the race to the bottom. So yeah, that is my rather depressing prediction. If you head over to thegoodfactory.co.uk, you can sign up to our newsletter, and it links through to our socials as well. Although really I'm only active on LinkedIn. I'm not a visually creative person, so I'm not on the platforms where you actually have to create beautiful images. I just like that text-based. But I recommend signing up to our newsletter. We try and provide as much value as possible, like every week, through that. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sam, for your time and providing so much valuable information. This is such an important topic for all brands, something that everyone should understand and dig into a little bit more just to have a better future. So thank you again, guys, for listening to this podcast episode. Make sure you subscribe. We'll shortly be out with a new episode. Have a great day.